Before anyone ever tried to name it, before the sound became a warning or a joke or a half-forgotten local story, the Ozarks already had a reputation of their own. This was not wilderness in the dramatic sense, no towering peaks, no endless plains, but something tighter, older, and more complicated. The Ozark Plateau stretches across Missouri, Arkansas, and into Oklahoma, a region defined less by what you see and more by what you don't. The hills roll instead of rise, valleys fold inward, forests close ranks quite quickly, swallowing roads, sounds, and sometimes people. Isolation here isn't dramatic, it's practical. Even today, cell service fades without warning. Back roads bend and double back on themselves. At night, darkness doesn't fall, it settles, thick and uninterrupted, broken only by insects and the distant movement of animals you'll never see. Sound behaves strangely in those arcs. The terrain bends it, limestone bluffs reflect it. Dense woods absorb parts of it while amplifying others. A noise made miles away can arrive sounding close while something nearby can vanish entirely. Old hunters learned this early. So did farmers, so did children told not to wander too far after sunset. Long before the howler, people already knew one thing. If you heard something unfamiliar, distance meant nothing. The region's early settlers adapted quickly. Cabins were built close together. Livestock was kept nearer to the house than in flatter country. Dogs were valued less for hunting and more for their reactions because animals here often sensed things before people did, and animals reacted. Cattle grew skittish without visible cause. Horses refused certain trails. Dogs would sometimes freeze mid-step, ears raised, tails low, as if registering a sound humans couldn't yet perceive. These moments weren't alarming on their own. They were simply part of living in a place that didn't explain itself. Those arcs have always resisted mapping. Caves lace the ground beneath the forests, some charted, many not. Sinkholes appear without warning. Water travels underground as often as if it flows on the surface, resurfacing miles away. Locals learned early that what lay beneath mattered just as much as what stood above. That understanding shaped how stories formed here. People didn't rush to name strange things. They observed first. They waited. They learned patterns quietly. Folklore in those arcs didn't arrive with drama. It accumulated through repetition and restraint. Which is why, when the sound finally came, it didn't immediately become a legend. At first, it was just wrong. Not loud enough to panic, not familiar enough to ignore. A sound that didn't match the rhythm of known animals, didn't rise or fall the way predators did, and didn't behave like wind, machinery, or human voices. It didn't announce itself, it slipped in. And because the Ozarks had already taught people to respect the unknown, most didn't talk about it right away. They listened instead. They waited to see if it would repeat. It did. Not everywhere, not often. Always just enough to remind those who heard it that this land had never promised clarity and never would. The Ozark Howler didn't arrive in a place unprepared. It arrived in a region that already knew how to stay quiet. The earliest mentions of the sound didn't come from newspapers or radio reports. They came from margins, handwritten notes, passing remarks, entries added almost as afterthoughts in hunting journals and local records that were never meant to be read by anyone else. Men who kept track of weather, game movement, and trail conditions would occasionally add a single line that didn't fit with the rest. Strange noise after dark, heard again near the ridge. Not wolves. There was no urgency in the writing, no fear, just correction, an acknowledgement that something heard did not match what was expected. What's important is the timing. These early mentions cluster around the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a period where the Ozarks were becoming more settled but still largely unmonitored. Rail lines skirted the region, logging camps came and went, communities remained small, inward looking and skeptical of outsiders. People knew animal sounds, they depended on that knowledge to survive. When they heard the howls, they didn't describe them as screams, they didn't exaggerate, they struggled instead of with comparison. Some wrote that it carried like a wolf but broke unevenly as if the sound couldn't hold its shape. Others said it began low, rose abruptly, then dropped off too fast, ending before the ear could adjust. One farmer near the Arkansas-Missouri line described it as a noise that didn't belong to the throat making it. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. What's striking is how geographically scattered the early reports are. Not one valley, not one county. Pockets of mentions appear across hundreds of miles of rough terrain, often years apart with no shared terminology and no obvious way for the stories to spread. This wasn't a rumor traveling, it was something being encountered independently. Hunters reported hearing it while stationary, sitting in tree stands or resting along ridges. That detail matters. Moving through the woods can distort perception. Sitting still does not. Several accounts mention the sound seeming to pass through the forest rather than echo across it, as if the trees weren't obstructing it at all. There were no follow-ups. No one chased the noise. No one tried to track it. That wasn't caution. It was habit. In those arcs, unfamiliar sounds were noted, not pursued. The woods had taught people that chasing noise often led nowhere good. Local law enforcement records from the early 1900s contain a few strange entries as well. Not investigations, just calls that resolved themselves, farmers reporting animals unsettled, residents mentioning a disturbance that stopped before anyone arrived. Nothing that warranted escalation. Nothing that left evidence. And because the sound didn't repeat predictably, it didn't become a topic of conversation. You might hear it once in your lifetime. You might hear it twice, years apart, in different places. Some never heard it at all. The absence of consistency is why it went unnamed for so long. It wasn't until later, when people began comparing notes across counties, that the realization set in. Others had heard it too. Not the same night, not the same year, but the same kind of sound, the same wrongness. Only then did it start to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern. And once patterns emerge, names follow, but the sound came first. Always the sound. Once people accepted that the sound wasn't isolated, that it had been heard by others in other places, the natural next step was to ask the question no one had bothered with before. What was making it? That question should have produced answers. The Ozarks were full of experienced hunters, trappers, and outdoorsmen. Bears, cougars, wolves, every large animal that could possibly exist in the region had already been cataloged, debated, hunted, or driven out. By the early 20th century, there should have been clarity. Instead, there was fragmentation. Descriptions began to surface, but they refused to line up. Some witnesses insisted the creature was massive, larger than any known cat, heavier than a wolf, built low and wide like a bear, but moving too fluidly for one. Others claimed it was lean, long-legged, almost skeletal in outline, with a posture that didn't match quadrupeds at all. The only agreement was disagreement. Hair color varied wildly, jet black, ash gray, reddish brown, sometimes described as patchy or uneven, as if the coat didn't grow uniformly. A few claimed it had a mane. Others said it looked mangy, unfinished. Eyes were mentioned rarely, and that omission is telling. When eyes did come up, the accounts contradicted each other completely. Some said they reflected like a cat's. Others said they didn't reflect at all. A handful of witnesses said they couldn't remember the eyes, only that the face seemed wrong in proportion. Several descriptions ended abruptly as if the person had lost interest mid-thought or chosen not to finish. And then there were the shapes. A recurring theme in these early descriptions is uncertainty about how the creature moved. Some swore it ran on four legs. Others said it rose briefly, crossed open ground upright, then dropped back down. A few described it as hopping or bounding in a way that didn't resemble known predators. What stand out is that these accounts don't escalate. No dramatic embellishment, no growing mythology. People didn't build on each other's descriptions, they replaced them, which created a problem. If the Ozark Howler had been a misidentified animal, the descriptions would have converged over time. People learn from each other. They correct errors. They adopt expectations. That never happened. Instead, the legend fractured. Local explanations tried to patch the gaps. Some suggested escaped exotic animals. Others blamed malformed bears or hybridized predators. A few leaned toward folklore, old European creatures transplanted into American soil. None of it stuck. Even skeptics admitted something unusual. No physical description ever aligned with the sound. Whatever people thought they saw didn't explain what they heard. The howl remained the most consistent feature, far more consistent than the body producing it. That mismatch unsettled people. Hunters trusted sound more than sight. Sound warned you before danger appeared. Sound gave distance, direction, intent. When sound and sight disagreed, instinct said the sound was telling the truth, which raised a quite uncomfortable idea. Maybe the howler didn't have a single form, or maybe people weren't meant to see it clearly. By the time these descriptions circulated widely enough to attract outside interest, the lack of consensus had already done its damage. Scientists found nothing stable to investigate, skeptics found nothing concrete to debunk, and locals learned something else instead. Trying to describe it made it less understandable, not more. So many stopped trying. They went back to listening. If the Ozark Howler had ever been reduced to a body, it might have been dismissed. Misidentified animals happen, fear fills in gaps, darkness distorts shape. All of that was familiar to the people who lived there, but the sound refused explanation. Those who heard it almost always described the moment the same way, not as a shock, but as a pause. Conversation stopped, movement slowed. The forest didn't erupt into chaos the way it does when predators move through. It quieted, as if everything nearby was listening along with you. The howl didn't announce danger, it announced presence. It usually began low, barely noticeable, a vibration more than a sound. Some thought it was wind moving through hollows or caves beneath the ground. Others mistook it at first for distant machinery or thunder rolling far beyond the hills. Then it rose, not smoothly, not naturally. It climbed in uneven steps, stretching upward in pitch until it reached a point that made the listener tense without understanding why. The sound lingered there too long, just past what felt acceptable, before breaking apart. That break-in is what people remembered. The howl didn't fade the way animal calls do. It fractured. Parts of it seemed to drop away while others continued, twisting slightly out of alignment, as if multiple thoughts were failing to stay synchronized. Some described it as layered. Others said it sounded like one voice imitating many and doing it poorly. What frightened people wasn't volume, it wasn't even aggression. It was control. The howl carried over hills, through trees, across distances that should have scattered it. It bent around terrain instead of bouncing off it. In certain places, it sounded close no matter how far away it should have been, and it ended abruptly. No tapering, no echo, just absence. Afterward, dogs reacted differently than they did to wolves or coyotes. Instead of barking, many went silent. Some hid. Others refused to leave porches or barns for hours afterward. Livestock clustered tightly together, even animals that normally fought for space. People noticed their own reactions too. A pressure behind the eyes, a tightness in the chest, a lingering sensation that something had just passed by rather than remained. Several witnesses admitted that, for a few seconds after the howl ended, they expected to hear it again, and when it didn't return, that absence felt deliberate. Attempts to record the sound came much later, and they failed more often than not. Early audio equipment either picked up nothing or captured something distorted beyond recognition. Witnesses listening to recordings would shake their heads and say the same thing: "That's not it." Not wrong exactly, just incomplete, as if the sound relied on distance, space, and air itself in a way technology couldn't replicate. One detail surfaces again and again in these accounts, quiet but consistent. The howl never repeats immediately. No call and response, no echoing chorus, no second confirmation. It happens once, sometimes twice in a night, separated by hours, and then it's gone. That pattern suggested something unsettling. The Ozark Howler wasn't calling out to others for its kind. It wasn't making territory. It was letting whoever heard it know they had been noticed, and then it moved on. Most reports of the Ozark Howler stop at sound. That's where people are comfortable leaving the story. Hearing something is survivable. Seeing it, really seeing it, changes the tone. Visual encounters almost always happen at the boundary between light and dark, dusk, early dawn, moonlit clearings, times when the eye is already negotiating shadows, when depth becomes unreliable and the forest reshapes itself with every shift of perspective. Witnesses rarely notice movement first. They notice absence, a gap in the tree line that wasn't there before, a stretch of brush pressed flat as if something heavy passed through without breaking branches, a sense that the woods ahead have been rearranged slightly like furniture moved in a familiar room. Then the shape resolves. Some describe it standing at the edge of fields, just beyond where cultivated land gives way to wild growth. Others see it along ridges, silhouetted against low cloud or mist. In every case, it keeps distance, not hiding, choosing a position where it can be seen without being approached. No one reports it charging. No one reports it stalking in the traditional sense. It doesn't behave like a predator evaluating prey. It watches. That watching creates a specific discomfort. People say they couldn't tell where its attention was focused, yet felt directly observed. The sensation didn't come from eye contact. Often the face was indistinct, but from posture. The way its body aligned with them, the way it remained perfectly still even when the wind moved everything else. Movement, when it happened, was wrong in small ways. It crossed open ground too smoothly, covered distance without the expected shift in weight. When it turned, it didn't pivot naturally. The motion seemed segmented, as if parts of the body followed the decision to turn at slightly different times. Witnesses often lose track of it mid-observation, not because it ran, but because their attention drifted for a fraction of a second, checking surroundings, listening for another sound, and when they looked back, it was no longer there. No footprints, no broken foliage, no sign of departure. Several people reported an impulse during these moments, a sudden certainty that stepping closer would be a mistake. Not fear in the usual sense, but clarity. The same instinct that stops you from touching a hot surface before pain occurs. That instinct ended encounters. People turned back, closed doors, returned to vehicles. The howler didn't follow. It didn't need to. Afterward, witnesses struggled to describe what they had seen. Details slid away, size changed in memory, color shifted. Some couldn't remember whether it had a tail or not, or how many legs were on the ground when they first noticed it. But one detail stayed fixed. It was never surprised to be seen. That realization lingered longer than the image itself. Whatever the Ozark Howler was, these encounters suggested it didn't stumble into human spaces by accident. It chose when to be visible, and it chose when to disappear. By the time sightings and hearings of the Ozark Howler had accumulated enough to form a rough timeline, something unexpected became clear. There was no pattern anyone could use. Researchers tried, of course, even informal ones. Local historians mapped reports across counties. Hunters compared seasons. Weather patterns were logged. Moon phases noted. Livestock losses cross-referenced. Every variable that usually reveals behavior in animals was tested against the data. Nothing aligned. The howler didn't favor winter or summer. It appeared during droughts and floods alike. It didn't cluster around calving seasons or following migration routes. It didn't avoid human activity, nor did it seek it out. The only consistency was inconsistency. Sightings occurred near farms, deep in forest, along ridgelines, beside rivers, and occasionally near towns without ever entering them. The creature seemed comfortable near boundaries, tree lines, property edges, old roads, but not dependent on them. That led to a quiet but troubling realization among those paying attention. The howler wasn't behaving like a living population. There were no signs of breeding, no young ever reported, no carcasses, no increase or decrease over time. The number of reports remained strangely stable across decades, fluctuating only with how willing people were to talk about it. Which raised a question no one liked asking. If this thing wasn't surviving, what was it doing? Some locals proposed that the Ozarks themselves played a role. The terrain is riddled with caves, sinkholes, and underground waterways. Sound travels oddly there, shadows behave badly. It's easy to imagine something hiding beneath the surface, emerging when conditions are right. But that explanation faltered when reports came from areas without cave systems or from ridges where nothing could be concealed beneath the ground. Others suggested the howler wasn't one thing at all, but many misidentified animals folded into a single legend. That explanation collapsed under the weight of the sound. Too many people described the same impossible howl, separated by years and miles. And then there was the timing. Many witnesses noted the howler appeared during moments of transition, leaving for a hunt, returning home late, crossing from one valley to another, pausing between tasks. It didn't interrupt events. It occurred in the spaces between them. That subtlety mattered. It suggested intention without urgency, presence without interference, as if the creature occupied the margins of human activity rather than opposing it. A few old-timers offered a different perspective, usually quietly, usually after a long pause. They said the Ozark Howler didn't belong to the land the way animals do. It belonged to the place. Not a species moving through terrain, but something tied to the Ozarks as a concept, a condition, not a creature. Something that existed because the land allowed it to exist and would stop when the land no longer could. That idea couldn't be proven, but it explained why nothing fit, why tracking failed, why descriptions fractured. Why the howler appeared unchanged across generations. Why it didn't leave behind the evidence biology demands. It wasn't following rules, it was occupying a role, and whatever that role was, it didn't require resolution, just witness. Most people who encountered the Ozark Howler remembered the sound itself. Fewer talked about what happened around it. But when those accounts were compared, another layer emerges, subtle, easy to miss, and far more unsettling. The forest didn't react the way it should have. When wolves howl, the woods respond. Coyotes answer, birds flush, insects scatter. Even bears trigger movement, noise, disturbance. The Ozark Howler did the opposite. Moments before the sound, witnesses noticed a thinning of background noise. Crickets slowed, then stopped. Frogs went silent mid-call. Wind through leaves diminished, not because the air stilled, but because it seemed to lose texture, branches barely moving, foliage hanging unnaturally still. It wasn't sudden. It felt like a dimmer being turned down, and the howl came. During it, animals remained silent, not frozen in fear, absent, as if their presence had been temporarily withdrawn from the space. Hunters described the sensation as hunting in a photograph rather than a living environment. After the sound ended, the forest didn't immediately recover. Silence lingered longer than expected, sometimes minutes, sometimes longer. When noise returned, it came back unevenly. One species at a time, insects first, then distant birds, larger animals much later. Dogs reacted last of all. Those brought into the area after a howl showed confusion. They sniffed the ground repeatedly, circling without direction, whinnying softly. Some refused to track anything for the rest of the day, as if the normal scent structure of the forest had been disturbed. Livestock reactions mirrored this disruption. Cattle clustered away from tree lines. Horses became skittish without external cause. Chickens stopped laying for short periods following nights when the howl was heard nearby. None of these effects were permanent, but they were consistent. What disturbed observers most was not the fear response, it was the reset. The woods seemed to require time to reassert itself after the howler passed through, as if whatever had moved through that space temporarily displaced the natural order. A few biologists who reviewed these reports privately noted something uncomfortable. Silence is not a reaction, it's an absence of reaction. Predators create chaos, prey create alarm, environmental shifts create confusion, but the howler created a void, as if the forest itself had stepped aside. In one account, a man who heard the howl while sitting on a ridge at night described the sensation plainly. It felt like the land was holding its breath. When the breath released, everything returned, but not all at once, and not without hesitation. That delay raised a possibility few were willing to voice openly. The Ozark Howler wasn't just moving through the forest, it was being accommodated by it, as if the woods recognized something passing through that didn't belong to the usual hierarchy, and responded by making room. Even today, decades after the earliest recorded reports, the Ozark Howler has not disappeared. It exists quietly in the margins, a pattern of sound and absence that persists alongside human activity without ever fully intersecting it. Modern technology has not simplified its study. Recordings are unreliable and analysis often reveals nothing recognizable. Sometimes devices capture fragmented sounds, strange vibrations and warped pitches, unnatural layering, but playback fails to convey what witnesses experienced firsthand. The forest swallows the howler as effectively as it swallows the echoes of human voices. Eyewitness reports continue through sporadically. Farmers driving home after dusk hear an unidentifiable howl across a ridge. Hunters pause mid-trail, straining to locate the source before it dissolves into silence. Even in towns at the edges of the Ozarks, residents sometimes describe a distant sound that doesn't belong, a vibration that disturbs the natural order of moments before receding. In the end, the howler endures in the same way all true mysteries do, unsettling, quiet, and perpetually just out of reach. It does not demand understanding. It does not beg for explanation. It exists in the space between human perception and the vast, unyielding wilderness of Ozarks. A reminder that some phenomena will never be tamed, measured, or fully explained. For those who walk the ridges, the valleys, and the hidden hollows of this land, its presence is a constant whisper. The forest has rules humans cannot know, and sometimes the land itself will answer back.